Well, hello friends, this here's David Vost. Today is February the 23rd, 2016. It's very good to see everybody today. Well, the other day I had said that I wanted to start a series of videos on the history of the universe. And so, I guess you could say this may be the first in the series, although it's a little odd because I don't really plan on going back to the very, very beginning in this. I think I'm just going to, as y'all know, I just turn this darn thing on and start talking. So I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth here. I don't really have a plan. There's a lot of stuff I want to tell you, and I kind of go through this as I can think of it and as I remember it. Hold on one second. I forgot. I'm going to plug that in to the cigarette lighter, and I don't know if that's going to change the viewing of this, but it makes the picture brighter for me. So, well, there's a lot of stuff that, like I say, I'm not going to go out in this video. I don't think I want to start at the very beginning. We've covered a lot of that. But there's a lot of stuff that we're missing. It's very strange to me because we've got so much history that we don't use. Because we were told as Christians the only thing we can ever read is the Bible. And we're never told that Bible means a group of books. And when the Catholics put this together, they had more books in there, and we took some out. And there were other canons, just because the Catholics chose this group of books, and the group we have today is chosen by the Protestants. But there were Gnostic canons and different canons of Scripture, and all it means is ancient history. There were hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of books over the ages that have been written. We still to this day have history galore, but we just, as Christians, we're all Christians, so we just don't want to read it. The Sumerian tablets, the Babylonian tablets, the Enuma Elish, just all kinds of history. The Egyptian tablets. There's a pyramid in Egypt that's got 7 layers. The bottom layer is covered in sand, but not too long ago, they went in there and found all this writing on the walls. Had all these 5-sided stars and all this ancient writing, which is actually 2,500 years older than the Bible, and is considered now to be the oldest written record in the world, and it's in Egypt. And boy, are we learning stuff that we just weren't told as Christians. But even the information that we had for quite a while now, like the book of Jasher, which is mentioned in the Bible. The book of Jude mentions Peter mentions the book of Enoch. We know that there are other extra biblical texts, and a lot of times I'll be telling you guys stuff like, Mary was a priestess, and you're like, where'd you get that? I mean, well, some of this is what I'm being told, but most of this you can just find in history books. The ancient Gospels that we dug up in the Nag Hammadi library talk about how Mary, well, the Catholics have this book, and Mary was sent to the temple when she was 3 years old. So that's why she was a virgin, because she was a temple priestess. She was a virgin priestess. What people don't know, because they don't tell you because they don't know, is that the temple that Mary went to was not the temple at Jerusalem. Because you see, remember, Jesus' cousin was John the Baptist. It says in the Bible that was his cousin. So Jesus was related to John the Baptist. But how? Because John the Baptist, we know, was a priest. So everybody says, well, let's see, he was a priest, so he's got to be a Levite. But we know Jesus is from Judah, they think. So this is all very confusing to people. So they just say, we don't know, we don't even mention that because we don't understand it. Well, the truth is that John the Baptist was a priest, but he wasn't a Levitical priest. And it says in the Bible, but we just don't understand the lingo. But it says that he wore a special garment. It was the garment that Elijah wore. It was the same special holy garment. And it was the garment of a different priesthood, the garment of the Zadokite priesthood. It was the garment of the prophet Elijah, who, remember, had a different priesthood. And he took and he made the prophets, and he made the school of the prophets. In other words, he took the prophets and put them in these schools. They were the mystery schools, and they learned these great mysteries. Got to really study the Old Testament pretty good to realize and to find that there was this other priesthood that was at Bethel. This is where Elijah the prophet was. And those mysteries came down not through Jerusalem and not through the Levitical priesthood. It was an ephod and a priesthood there that was set up by Gideon in the Old Testament. And it was really first started and taught by Deborah, who was the mother of Israel. But anyway, we've gone into some of this in a lot of the other videos. So Elijah was a priest, but not of the Levitical kind. Elijah, if you will go back and look in the genealogies, was not a Levite. Elijah was a Tishbite. And it says that Tishbe was a town near Gilead. Now, if you do some other research, you'll find that this area of Gilead was a outpost of the Egyptian mysteries. And it turns out there's lots of stuff Christians just are not being told. I mean, first of all, they've done a lot of archaeological digging around Jerusalem, and they've never found Solomon's temple. They've dug down, and they can find Zerubbabel's temple, but there's no Solomon's temple. So Solomon's temple, Solomon, really was a description of something that most people just don't understand. Sometimes when the Bible's talking about Egypt, we think, well, that's got to be down there by, the pyramids or something. Egypt was a large country. And Egypt took in a large area, all the way up into the Negev sometimes. So sometimes when it says Egypt, it's not necessarily talking about down into Egypt proper as it is today. There's a lot of confusion. So, Solomon built a temple, but he didn't build it in Jerusalem. Now, there's good evidence that Solomon built his temple. They found the pillars of Boaz and Jachin down in Egypt. And this was something that was done by the pharaohs. We find out now that Pharaoh Akhenaten was probably Joseph or perhaps Moses. A lot of the scholars today think that this particular pharaoh was Moses. But I think it was representing of the fact that for a period of time from Joseph down to Moses, the pharaohs were descendants of Joseph. And this goes all the way back to Abraham, and then back to Noah, to Enoch. And from Enoch, of course, Enoch was a son of the gods. So it goes back to Anu, and this is why the city in Egypt was called On, the city of On, or the city of Anu. And this was the royal priesthood. It's very confusing, I understand, because most of you only believe, and you only think, oh, Israel's the holy seed, see? But you don't realize that there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you're missing. There are 12 tribes. And Judah was one tribe that was rejected. It was given the scepter for only a period of time. But the true ruler, a king over the world, would be through Joseph, who would go back all the way back to Anu. And so when Jehovah, this God Enki, brought the children of Israel up out of Egypt, you'll notice that he says in Exodus chapter 12, verse 12, he talks about being angry with the gods of Egypt. See, Jehovah didn't like those other gods. He was mad. And all those gods had animal faces and stuff like that. Those are the gods of the zodiac. He was angry with them, and he brought the 10 plagues. And finally, the last plague was the death of their firstborn. Because, you see, Jehovah didn't want... See, the gods were coming down to the earth. Remember, we talked about the 12 gods, and they came in through the genome, into the DNA, and they were the gods and the qualities and the attributes of the gods represented by the zodiac and the astrological signs came into man, into this temple. And there's a great plot being carried out, because there's going to be this combining of man with God and the birth of a new creature. This is the new creation, or the new birth, which is Christ in us. So, if the gods came into Egypt, then you can understand how the ego doesn't like this. It doesn't want this new birth. So Jehovah's trying to kill Christ. Isaiah chapter 53, Jehovah says he wanted to crush him. So Jehovah's standing there and saying, I want to take vengeance on all these gods. And he gets the upper hand, and he, through destiny, was allowed to defeat them for a while. See, the flesh was allowed to defeat the spirit for a while. We were trapped and deceived into this ignorance, and that's what this is all about. And he creates these laws which entraps us because of our lust, because we were greedy and we lusted after flesh. So he's angry with the gods, and then in like verse 29 of Exodus 12, it says that he killed all the firstborn of Egypt, so that way he could make certain that there wouldn't be any heir. See, he was trying to kill Christ, remember? A lot of you are like, oh, that's terrible. Christians, wow, Herod killed all the babies. He's evil. It's the devil. Only the devil would kill all the babies. Well, here Jehovah's killing all the babies. Just wipes out an entire nation practically and kills all their firstborn babies because he wanted to make sure he got Christ or that royal seed. And he says, but I'm going to preserve Israel. Israel's mine. Well, he didn't realize it, but he was doing something that our Father in heaven wanted him to do. You see, you take a seed and you plant it in the earth and it dies. And Paul says that it cannot be made alive unless first it dies. So Christ had to die first before he could be made alive inside of us. So the gods came down into Egypt and died. That's what happened, friends. This is what the Passover is all about. And this God Jehovah passes over us with this Christ within us, not realizing that he couldn't really kill us. It was only going to be reborn. He demanded the death of the lamb, you see, in place of the firstborn of Egypt. So Christ says, when he comes, he says, okay, I'm going to do this willingly. My Father in heaven is going to allow me to lay down my life that I might take it up again. So the gods of Israel, or the gods of Egypt, or the gods of this world that came down into Egypt, into this earth, willingly laid down their lives and put their attributes and nature into the human temple, knowing that through this process they would be reborn. See, Osiris was chopped up into these pieces, knowing that he'd be regathered. And the 12 tribes then are the 12 natures of the astrological natures of the gods that came down into the human being and are going to be brought back up out of Egypt and reborn as a mixed multitude that come up out of Egypt. And in Revelation it says, I behold and look, a great multitude which no man was able to number, every tribe, tongue, and nation, standing before the Lord with the white robes and palm branches in their hands. So Passover is the birth of Christ, but the death of the old nature, that willing sacrifice of this physical flesh that dies and is crucified, and then the birth of Christ, which is the seed. I called my son out of Egypt. But of course Christ goes back to Joseph, because Joseph was the one son who would get the birthright, who would rule over his brethren. And Joseph goes back to Enoch, and that goes back to Anu. Now, as we said, Mary goes back then to this other line. She was a high priest in a different temple. See, in the days of Greece, we've got a story in the Bible that talks about how they desecrated the temple. And then the children, or the priesthood of Zadok, separated themselves and said they would never go up and have anything to do with Israel again. They were so disgusted with it because it was just so carnal and evil. They had desecrated this temple by bringing in the worship of a bull. And this is what Israel was worshiping, Baal, really. So they went into the desert, and that's where they made another temple. And this was really the temple of Solomon. Not the temple there in Jerusalem, or the temple of Zerubbabel. And this is where we get the word Magdala, Mary of Magdalene. Magdalene's not her last name. You know, they don't have last names like that like we do today. This has come down to us in a long line of traditions. The way we've come to names today is a lot different than the way they used to have it. But sometimes their last name would describe where they lived or what they did, or or sometimes it would say son of somebody else. In a sense, that would be like we're doing today. But Magdalena means she was Mary, or the high priest of the triple-tiered temple. And the triple tier is just like the temple that, any temple that has 3 compartments: the outer court, the inner court, and the most holy. And the highest tower in the middle was that area, that smaller area in the middle, where the tower was, and that was the center or the core of the temple. So Magdalena was the temple where Mary, the Virgin, spent her entire life. It says in the scriptures that she was taken there to the temple when she was 3 years old. So this was the temple where they were in the desert. This is where the Essenes were, there at Gilead, at the base of Mount Carmel. This was an outpost of the Egyptian mysteries. And this is spoken of in the ancient classical writings. Pythagoras talks about it. He attended these schools. This were the Greek Stoics and the philosophers, and this was the ancient wisdom. I mean, Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato talk about how they received their initiation and their knowledge. A lot of us just think, well, they were philosophers. They just had a school. They just sat there and invented stuff and were scientists or something. No, they had a priesthood. This was the priesthood. And it went back to Egypt. See, Plato says that he got his information from Solon, who was a high priest, and got it from the great mysteries from Egypt. And they started schools throughout Greece. They started these schools throughout a whole, they were all over Egypt, the Negev, Israel, Palestine, up into Syria. They were making them into Italy, up in France and England. They had these schools all over the world. Now, you can imagine that the Anunnaki were here before the flood, and you can imagine also that they were here after the flood. See, they knew what they're doing, and there's a reason for them being here. The reason for the gods was to produce this mixture of the races. This is what Enki was doing with the DNA. And of course, heaven, or Anu, sent Ning Sita down to make sure that Enki wasn't messing around with us, because in the deck of cards you've got one of the cards that's called the Joker. Well, they used to call that the Fool or the Knave. Well, this trickster is the person we call the tempter or the deceiver in the Bible. This is Satan. Satan is the ego, the trickster, the fool, the flesh. And this was Enki, who wrote the flesh and deceived everyone and put us into this flesh. But unbeknownst to Enki, one of his sons was born of a virgin. And the seed was from heaven, was put into this DNA that would be like a door, so that we could escape the tricky dicky. We could escape this corruption. And Christ would stand at the door and knock, and anybody who says, come on in, he comes in and he trims the wicks and gets those chakras burning, and we have the enlightenment. And this is something that the Bible talks about in symbols, but most people just don't know what all these things mean. So, because Jesus was a cousin of John the Baptist, we know that he's related then, or that his mother, because it wasn't his father was from Judah. We have the genealogy of Joseph, his adopted father, because he was born of a virgin. But Joseph's genealogy goes back to Judah. But it doesn't give Mary's genealogy. But we know that she was related to Anna and Elijah, John the Baptist. Now, ancient writings that are as old as the biblical New Testament give us specifically that John the Baptist was related to Solomon and Bathsheba, or the Queen of Sheba. Now, if you go into the book of Jasher, you'll find that Sheba was really the daughter of Cush. You see, so there was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth was the firstborn, and it's very clear in there that Japheth went to France. It says that his son Elisha is the French. The Franks. Well, actually, kind of the French. Today, France is not exactly where the Franks were, but very, very close. And his children were Rome, the Romans, the Italians, and the French, and the Bulgars. And it just literally tells you all this stuff, all these details that our Bible just doesn't tell us and leaves out, because they purposely left this stuff out of our Bibles. It explains that Shem went up to Assyria and to Persia, and the land of Uz that the Bible talks about, where Job was, see, because he was the priesthood from the east, that's over there in Assyria, in the land of Uz, which was one of the children of Shem, who went over into Ashur, which is Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, and India. And those were the children of Shem. And that was the eastern priesthood, the priesthood of Melchizedek. Of course, Ham got Africa. So, Sheba, then, is talked about in our story, but most Christians have no idea who Sheba is, because they don't have the book of Jasher. They don't want to read it. Well, she's a pretty important woman. She was a queen, a very important queen, Queen of Sheba. Most people think, well, she might have been black, because it actually says she was black. But why is David marrying Bathsheba, the daughter of Sheba? And why is Solomon marrying the Queen of Sheba? Well, because it was a royal marriage. Solomon and David, you see, were children of Ephraim. And Ephraim is the son of Joseph. And Joseph has the birthright. This is something Christianity just doesn't have any idea what's going on. So anyway, Sheba is the son of Cush. Cush was the firstborn of Ham. So, there you go. This is why she was so important. Now remember, in the book of Jasher, it talks about all this in detail. It talks about how after the flood, before the flood, there was this garments that Adam had, that Jehovah gave Adam and Eve. And they preserved those garments. And they finally were handed down to Noah. And Noah had them, but Ham stole them and gave them to Nimrod. Remember, Nimrod was the son of Cush. He was the firstborn. So, talked about Nimrod a lot in the book of Jasher, and how he became the king, and he was this great, mighty hunter. He's the one that started all this sacrifice. And it says that he was that Jehovah backed him. See, it doesn't tell us this in our Bible. We just think Nimrod's a bad guy, and Jehovah is the good God, and Jehovah didn't like him. But that's not what it says in the book of Jasher. It says that Jehovah did like him. And Jehovah's the one that taught him how to hunt. Jehovah's the one that demanded the sacrifices of the animals. So, tradition got started from that point forward, that they would sacrifice animals and eat them. But what's really interesting, and what I'm trying to get across here, is that Sheba is one of the sons of Cush. And so this was the royal bloodline back through Ham, back to Adam. And they wore that garment that was given to Adam. But later on, that garment was, to be given to Shem. He became the ruler. But it's not the way you would think, you see, because it was Nimrod that actually appointed Terah, which is Abram's father, to become a very high royal general in his armies. And he eventually, he eventually had a son named Abram, and Abram was chosen by our Father in heaven to cross the Euphrates River and to go down there into Egypt and marry into those lines, because God had planned for Joseph to go down into Egypt, which was the son of Abraham, because Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob's firstborn was Joseph. So he went down into Egypt, married into the line of On, or Anu. And when Jehovah came, he was very angry, because he didn't want these gods to have a line of kings. So he killed all the firstborn in Egypt. But by doing this, Christ came up out of Egypt in our heart, and there came a mixed multitude. Jehovah didn't realize what he was really doing, but he was fulfilling the plans and the prophecies of our Father in heaven, and who had a great plan of love for all of his children. So the Essenes then were a group of people who worshipped in a different temple, had a different religion, did not accept the Jewish laws, the Jewish temple, but who knew the mysteries. And they had one of each of the 12 tribes there, so that they could preserve these 12. And this is explained to us in the New Testament, and they're called 12 disciples. Because when John the Baptist, who was the leader or the head of the Essenes, and officiated with that garment of Elijah in that different priesthood, when he was beheaded, Jesus became the leader. And it says in the New Testament that Jesus was a Nazarene. Now, see, Jesus was never born in Nazareth, because Nazareth did not exist. Now, you can look that up on the internet and find some Christian scholar that'll say, well, we found Nazareth. But there's a lot of stuff that modern apologists, Christian apologists, will tell you that it's just not true. The real scholars, the archaeologists, and those who really have studied these things, have said very point blank, there was no city of Nazareth. But the Bible itself explains it. It says that the Nazarenes were a sect, and after Jesus died, it says Paul was the ringleader. Well, the sect was a group of people that worshipped at a different temple, and they had the mysteries. So, this is why Jesus came and condemned the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the temple where they were. And the 12 disciples were representatives of each of the children of Israel. Now, we've talked about this in other videos, but I've never gone very far into this because I didn't know whether it was appropriate at that time to come out with this, because most of you are just not going to want to accept this. But I'm going to just go ahead and flatly explain this to you. You can believe it or not, but if you want to, you can do some research on your own. You'll find this is all to be true. But some time ago I said that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. Now, Mary was the high priest. She anointed her husband there in the Gospels. And this is the ancient tradition for the high priest through the priesthood line goes back to Egypt. They always anointed their husband with the alligator oil. And they called this Misa, or the Messiah, the anointing. And so Jesus was the Messiah, or the Misa, of the high priesthood from Egypt. And his wife, Mary Magdalene, was the priest of the triple-tiered temple that goes back to John the Baptist. John the Baptist was the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And so therefore he was half black and half white. And this is why, if you look into the internet and look at the pictures of Madonna, the Madonna and her child, they're always black. Even the ones in Europe, which were supposed to be Mary and Christ, they were always black. Because this is a long tradition that goes back through the Essenes, all the way back through Egypt. So, after Christ died, Mary Magdalene and Mary his mother and the other Mary, there were 3 Marys, took off in a boat with 2 other men, and they went to France. Now, why did they go to France?